All right. Well, I reckon we'll go ahead and start, everybody. I think it's 2:30, and I think everybody's in. It looks like everybody's in, loaded, and ready to go. Start off with a brief introduction of myself. My name is John Cavalier, and I am the owner of Cavalier House Books and the Louisiana Book Company, both based in Denham Springs, Louisiana. And I am also honored to serve on the SEBA board this term. And I am very pleased to be with you guys. I'm so glad to see so many folks come out for, which, you know, oftentimes isn't the funnest of topics to talk about with emergency planning and resiliency planning. But I know this year in particular, I think everybody kind of feels, I think everybody feels a certain anxiety, and I think everybody feels a certain need for it. So I'm very glad to see you guys today, and I thank you for joining me. I want to get right into it because I find most of these types of things most beneficial for me anyway, whenever there's as much interaction as possible. So I want to make sure that I give everybody plenty of time to ask questions, make comments, and what have you, because really, I don't have all of the answers, which we'll get into, because my main sort of biggest idea that I want to point out to everyone, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. I've got a couple of big ideas. And the first being the idea that emergency preparedness and resiliency planning is not about having all of the answers, but it's about gathering the right tools. A constant thing that I keep seeing on social media is everyone talking about 2020, and they can't wait for 2020 to be over with. And I, of course, myself, I cannot wait for 2020 to be over with. But I also realize that 2021 probably isn't going to be, you know, all kittens and sunshine. And so there'll definitely still be a need to make sure that we're prepared to go forward and make sure that whatever faces us in 2021 will, you know, we'll have the right tools to make sure that we can respond accordingly. The second big idea that I want to make sure that I get across today is that planning for an emergency is the same thing as planning for an opportunity. It doesn't mean something has to go wrong for all of these different things that we'll talk about today to be useful to you. It's the same thing if you have an opportunity to expand your business, if you have an opportunity to diversify revenue streams in a certain way, a publishing opportunity or an opportunity to buy your building, making sure that you have these sort of fundamental tools and fundamental approaches on deck is going to pay off either way, whether something bad happens or something good happens. So a little bit more about myself. I'll tell y'all about why this sort of thing matters to me and my personal experience with it. So we opened our store in 2009, and shortly thereafter, about 4 or 5 months later, we had this big 18-wheeler wheel come crashing through our children's section of our store. It was a very rude awakening to the idea that stuff happens and you don't know when it's going to happen. In this instance, it happened at 4:30 in the morning. We got a call from the police that were in our building. And so from there, about a year after we opened, the city decided to redo the sidewalks in front of our store, which, you know, all in all, it was a fantastic thing to have done. The sidewalks are beautiful now, but we did have to go through a period of probably about 2 months where it was difficult to physically get into our store, which, you know, of course, when we opened a year prior to that, we completely not anticipated. Then fast forward to when we started our book fair business. It was the year of the polar vortex, when all of these crazy northerly winds kept coming down into the south, and they would cause freezing rain and snow. And when we started our book fair business, obviously we're going into different schools every week, and it was a very rude awakening to just how fickle the weather can be whenever you are whenever you're trying to move forward and you're trying to implement a plan. Fast forward to 2016, and this was kind of the big granddaddy event for me that really sort of changed my life and set me on a different trajectory and changed basically the way I think about everything. on Earth. So this was the Great Flood of 2016, wherein most of our city and most of our parish were underwater for a period of about 2 or 3 days. And it was devastating to our community. It was devastating to our business. And we had no choice but to figure it out. And this is just a couple of shots of sort of the devastation that came through our community. And this is a picture of our house, mine and my wife, Michelle. And you have no idea of the amount of transformation that takes place with something like that until it actually happens. And so after that, you know, we started rebuilding our lives, rebuilding our business. We were fortunate that our bookstore didn't flood. It was just our home. But then 2017 rolls around and the federal government sponsored a thing called the NDRF, the National Disaster Recovery Framework in the city of Denham Springs, wherein basically they come in guns ablazing. FEMA brings in boots on the ground. They brought in, I think, 6 full-time staffers to work in the city of Denham Springs and basically re-envision the city. How's it going to move forward? How can we rebuild so that we're going to be more resilient in the future? And they offered training for anybody that wanted to participate, any citizens, any business owners, where basically you got specialized attention really to focus in on your specific area, your specific type of business, what your community needs and how you're going to move forward. And it was an absolutely amazing experience. It was fantastic. I spent the better part of 5 months volunteering with this effort full time, and it was absolutely transformational in my life. And now we'll fast forward to the present, where just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, some of you guys probably saw this floating around on social media, but ProPublica put out this great climate map and anticipated climate changes and anticipated risks to various counties. And for me, it really hit home because if you look closely at the list on the left-hand side there, you'll see that Livingston Parish, Louisiana is ranked as the eighth most prone to disaster in the coming 30, 40 years. So it's really something that I've had to kind of sink my teeth into because really there's no way around it. I mean, stuff starts happening and it really feels to me like things are going to keep changing. And that doesn't mean that they'll always be devastating, but in my mind, the only way to meet it is to just be prepared for it. And so I put together just kind of some tips on how to get started. And I tried to make it as approachable as possible because it is a daunting task. And for me, it's not something where, you know, you work on it for 15 minutes or you work on it for a day, but it's something that's kind of evolutionary and you incorporate it into your daily life. You incorporate it into your thought processes so that when you're operating your business, when you're living your life, you're trying to think of these things in the back of your mind just to make it a little bit easier on yourself should anything bad happen or should any opportunities come your way. So the first thing that is always the first thing you got to do to get started is to assess threats. And so on the left-hand side here, I've put some recommended reading. I tried to do a good book recommendation because we are booksellers after all, and that's the sort of thing we need to see. And then I've also tried to put the less fun little document. I've got a little PDF link down at the bottom, and I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with anybody that wants it so that you guys can click the links and have access to everything so you don't have to sit there furiously taking notes or anything. But so yeah, the book Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, which is it's a fantastic book about thinking about events that are highly unlikely to happen. We have biases as humans that we kind of put things out of our heads when we think that it's unlikely that it's going to happen. But this book really kind of frames things in the sense that things are more likely to happen than you think they are. And so it's kind of a really great refresher. You know, it's not specifically emergency or resiliency planning oriented, but it is a great thing to kind of prime your mind for it. And so the actual nuts and bolts, the actual steps here of threat and hazard identification and risk assessment. So that's a fun term that the federal government has, but basically it just asks three basic questions. And I've kind of geared them towards business, since we're, you know, all shop owners and booksellers here. Well, yeah, what are the hazards that can affect my business? If they occurred, what impacts would those threats and hazards have on my business? And based on those impacts, what capabilities and resources should my business have? And the little PDF on the bottom left of the screen is a great resource for actually going through those questions and engaging with them in a very critical way, and not in just sort of a passive way of thinking about, you know, the obvious things that can happen. I can share with you that I had sort of a, not really a rude awakening, but it was something that occurred to me that that never dawned on me. I was sitting in an emergency planning meeting for my city here in Denham Springs, and they were talking about the potential for a chemical spill. And that conversation went to the potential for a chemical spill, went into the potential for a train derailment and chemical spill. And I was like, you know, my bookstore is literally 200 feet from the train tracks in downtown Denham Springs. It's like, that's something that never occurred to me before. The train goes by 5 or 6 times a day. I never thought that the train might jump its tracks and scare the heck out of me. But sitting there in that meeting, I realized, yeah, we kind of need to, you know, it's not necessarily something that I've got to, you know, plan for every day of my life, but it is something that's nice to have thought about and think about the consequences of what would I do if I had to move quickly? What would I do if the area around me was, you know, quarantined off from everything else? What would I do if I had to move operations temporarily? That sort of thing. And really reaching out and doing the research with your community is a great way to do that. Your local emergency operations centers, your offices of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, those offices are going to have ready-made plans that are guaranteed, that are as close as what you can get, as close as you can to guaranteeing that you're thinking of all the different threats. Because if it's something that can happen in your community, it's probably something that can happen to you. And so it's a great way to kind of cheat off of somebody's work a little bit and pull in your county or municipal emergency plan. And you can really go down like a checklist and think about it and think if it's something that is actually going to be a threat to you and your business and your livelihood. I participated in our city's emergency operations plan, and that's exactly what we did. We took our parish's emergency operation plan. We chunked all the stuff that wasn't relevant to us. We added more stuff that was relevant to us. And then there was a lot of stuff that was just cut and paste, because by virtue of us being in the parish, it was applicable to us. And so we were able to get a lot of procedures down really quickly, and a lot of situations that we might have otherwise overlooked. And then moving on, after assessing, we have planning and strategy. This is probably, if you're going to read one book that I recommend, I definitely recommend reading this one, because it's the most fun, but it's also just the most, I think it's the most useful because it's the most fun, honestly. So Colonel Chris Hadfield tells you all about what it's like to live in outer space. And it's a livelihood that you can't just happen upon. You have to plan it out down to the most minute detail. And he conveys stories throughout his life where that astronaut mindset just kind of bleeds in. He's got funny stories, and it's an absolutely great book. And so if you read one book, I would definitely recommend that, because it's just, you know, you can plan for a tornado, but if you're planning for a tornado, you're not planning for a fire. If you plan for a fire, you're not planning for a hurricane. And so it's more about just kind of that mindset of, you know, making sure those tools are available. And then that link down at the bottom ready.gov/business is a fantastic resource, and it will actually tell you a little bit about the bullet points that I have on the right. So the first few, the create a business continuity plan with a business continuity resource worksheet, as well as the crisis communications plan. Those can be walked through step by step with some of those resources that are available on that link. And I very much recommend just going through it. It's one of those things where if you just sit down and get organized and get a few things on paper, it means the world in the event that something happens. The crisis communications plan specifically, during our flood in 2016, one of the crazy things that happened was we couldn't get in touch with anybody. Everybody was improvising with how to communicate with each other. And so Snapchat became very useful. Facebook Messenger became very useful because the cell phone networks went down and the landlines went down. And so there was spotty Wi-Fi with people that had, I forget what it was. I think AT&T went down, but Verizon didn't. And so everybody was looking for somebody with a Verizon phone so that they could get in touch with their loved ones. And so different things like that happen. And if it's something that can break, there's a possibility that it might. And having those sorts of things where you have your phone numbers, but you also have everybody's, email addresses, their Snapchat handles, their Twitter handles, whatever, because specifically after our flood, I know it was a slapdash piecemeal operation with trying to get in touch with everybody. And that extended to first responders in our area as well. Of course, they had their radios, but they were still trying to get in touch with the general public, and that also extends to the messages that you need to get out about your business or the operations that you can continue on having, because sometimes you might not have access to things, or sometimes you've got to meet people where they are. And so it's good to have those resources. I know we've invested, this is just me personally, I've got walkie-talkies now because of that. And so it's one of those things where I never want to be in that situation again. And then I just had a couple of useful tips that are just kind of bigger picture, overall sort of things, talking about offsite and mobile operations. The biggest thing that saved us after our flood was that we could go offsite. Our entire town was wrecked, and for months people were not shopping, people were not going out in town because everybody had to gut their houses and gut their businesses and try to get back on their feet. And so the thing that saved our business completely was the fact that our school book fair business was untouched. So we were able to take all of our inventory and we were able to travel to communities that were not affected so that we could get back on our feet more quickly. And then digitizing documents, cloud computing, document backups. Again, that's just something that is a practical. We use OneDrive and Google Drive. OneDrive I use for my personal cloud computing. Google Drive we use at the store. And I make sure that I have all of our documents backed up to all of our computers. So when Hurricane Laura was coming through a few weeks ago, the first thing that I did was I got 4 laptops out, my laptop, my wife's laptop, and a couple of backups. And I turned them all on and made sure Wi-Fi was connected so that every single computer had backups, and made sure that our point of sale was backed up to every computer, made sure that our accounting software was up to date, files were backed up to every computer. That way we had them at our house, we had them at our business, and we just had whatever we needed to go, we could go in a myriad of different directions. And then know your insurance agent and know your insurance coverage. I know us personally, we just renewed our insurance at the store, and they specifically added an exemption for communicable diseases in the face of this pandemic. And so it's a fun thing that insurance likes to do. They like to try to put those little clauses in there where this was applicable on a Tuesday, but it's no longer applicable on a Wednesday. And then the other biggest thing from a strategy perspective and a planning perspective is just always knowing where you are in your finances, knowing what debt you have, what credit you have, knowing exactly where you stand in all of your accounts, so that way you can move money and move resources as freely and as quickly as you can. Because like I said, after our flood, one of the biggest things was, we went from operating a store and book fair business to all of a sudden we're just a book fair business. And so we had orders that had to be amended. We had orders that had to be bulked up. We had some that had to be cut. We had things that had to be moved around, and just knowing where you are makes that a lot easier and a lot simpler to move forward with. And then another huge part of making sure that you're as resilient as possible is making sure that your community is resilient as possible. And that is just the community that you exist in with the relationships that you have. The relationships that I stress over on the right-hand side here with your banker, your insurance agent, your sales reps, credit reps, CPA, local elected officials. These are all people that I want to know on a first name basis, and I want them to know me, and I don't want to have to give them my backstory. I want them to be intimately familiar with my business from the moment that I send them a text message. It is incredibly, incredibly useful, especially, going into the pandemic specifically. We've got a great relationship with our business banker, and it's not just on like a tactical level important to know, but it's also just for like a mental health perspective. It's so comforting to know that, you're a person that means somebody to somebody else, rather than you're just an account, or rather than you're just a name on a list that they're trying to get down. But the fact that, going into the pandemic specifically, when schools were canceled in our area in March, the first thing that I did was text my banker, and I said, Chris, I don't know, we just lost a ton of revenue from these book fairs that we're not going to be doing. I have no clue what the future is going to hold, but just wanted to say what's up, and just reached out to him to say we might need to extend our line of credit. We might need to, do whatever. And then we were first in line for PPP funding when all of that came through, because we already had those lines of communications open and ready to move forward. Your emergency contact list, and communicate your plan with your staff and neighbors. These are such important things where when things are falling apart, however they may fall apart, it's good to be able to get in touch with people, and it's good to be able to collaborate with people in order to move forward. Our flood, when it came through in 2016, it was really unfortunate for our staffer, Matthew, that worked with us, because he was literally supposed to start, I think, the Tuesday after the flood, and then flooded on a Sunday. And so, I had to call him and say, sorry, bud, that's not going to happen now. And we had to, move on the fly. And then again, trade associations and bank are a huge part of the community that us as booksellers get to participate in on a regular basis. Trade associations, I know Linda Marie and Wanda before her, they were always, anytime something happened, they were always super eager to help and super eager to put us in touch with resources or work on our behalf or do whatever needed to be done. And it's the same thing with, folks that, you meet at the trade show, or you meet on Zoom calls like this. I've been fortunate enough that I can use my negative experiences in the past and help kind of share them with you guys. I know I've had several people in the past call me for advice on insurance or how to deal with, broken this or broken that. and we've certainly dealt with it in the past. And so, yeah, using your book selling family as a resource is huge. And then I'll throw in a plug for Bink specifically, where if you're not a contributing member to Bink, you should definitely consider it, because they are absolutely fantastic. We've had, I don't know how they hear about when stuff happens, but I remember specifically we had a bad storm here, and we had a tree limb fall on our roof. I think I posted it on Instagram, and within 45 minutes of this happening, I get emails from Bing. Hey, are you okay? Do you need anything? And so I can't praise them highly enough, because they're an absolutely amazing resource. And plus they gave us, they gave a lot of us those grants earlier, which was, of course, something that was very helpful as well during the pandemic, whenever you don't know exactly how cash flow is going to keep flowing. It was definitely a very welcome gift. And I realized that I neglected to talk about the book that I have featured here, but Community by Peter Block, The Structure of Belonging. And so that is a book that I particularly love. It's probably one of my favorite books. I read it during our disaster recovering process here in town. And with the subtitle, The Structure of Belonging, it really is kind of a fundamental way to think about working with people in small groups, and to make sure that you are maximizing your talents and gifts, and so that you can amplify each other. And it's an absolutely fantastic book. I highly recommend it. And then we go on to Mitigation with the fantastic book, Good Economics for Hard Times. That's a great book, just because what it manages to do is it takes all the challenges, the economic challenges that communities and individuals and businesses are facing all over the world, and it does a fantastic job of demonstrating how they've been overcome in some respects, or how people have adapted to them. And it is a fantastic book for getting in that mindset again of, responding to these things that are bigger than yourself. And then the link down on the bottom, the IRS Disaster Resource Guide. It is absolutely fantastic to get in and kind of pick it apart, to just kind of see from a financial perspective the strategies that you can implement on the financial side of your business, to make sure that you're doing things, not just the right way, but also the most beneficial way, so that if something happens, you're in line to work through it. And then the tips on the right-hand side here, we go through with shoring up fundamentals and keeping tools ready and well maintained. And that is just, I'm a big believer in organization. I'm a big believer in preparation, just trying to keep things neat and orderly. And so I'm very rigorous about the way that we do our budgeting. I'm very rigid about the way that we do, we analyze our cash flow, the way that we make sure all of our accounts are balanced and things are kept up with. We try to be very rigorous in our inventory management to make sure that things are not idle, so that way we're dealing with what needs to be dealt with instead of anything superfluous. And then the biggest thing at the bottom, and it's important because I put it in all caps and I put 3 exclamation points behind it, diversify your revenue streams. That is one in particular that in my opinion, I think it's one of the most important things that you could do in your business. And so that's what saved us in 2016, was the fact that we weren't just brick and mortar, we were also offsite, so we could go and do things. I'll tell you, after that is when we opened our second business, the Louisiana Book Company, because we had an opportunity that was in front of us with a regional wholesaler distributor that went out of business. And we saw it as a great opportunity to kind of move into that space. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest things we were thinking about at that time was diversifying our revenue streams. You don't think of, no one expected COVID to happen. No one expected the pandemic to happen. And for all of a sudden, all of the tourism that business depended on to dry up overnight, essentially. And so it's, you know, it's kind of, you know, take a step forward, take a step back sometimes. But I still have all the confidence in the world that that's going to come back, so that we'll still be able to have, you know, yet another revenue stream to come to you know, get us through things. But in the COVID era right now, our revenue stream is our brick and mortar bookstore and our online sales, and pivoting to PayPal and, you know, selling book bundles through Instagram and, you know, beefing up our online marketing and stuff. So I really look at the work that we've been doing with our online stuff as, you know, not just an extension of our store anymore, but I'm trying to think about it in terms of this is its own independent revenue stream, where yes, it works hand in hand with the store and it works hand in hand with other aspects of our business. But I definitely see the value in, you know, keeping our website up to a point where, you know, pre-COVID, you know, it was lagniappe. It was just extra to our brick and mortar business. But now I see the value in pursuing that further, which I'm sure most of you do. And then finally, I think this is my last slide. When it happens. And so this is just a bit of an acknowledgement that it's not if something is going to happen, but rather when something is going to happen. 3 weeks ago, the restaurant across the street from our store had a car drive into the side of it, wrecked their kitchen, had to get a completely new hood ventilation system installed in the restaurant. They were closed for 2 weeks. And the crazy thing I was thinking about how many times has that happened? And my store's been open for 11 years, and it's 4 times there have been incidents with vehicles up and down our street where they've done damage to a facade, or in that instance, crash into a building, or in my instance, when the 18-wheeler tire came through our building. And I was thinking the other day, my friend Candace at Tubby and Coo's Bookshop, she posted a picture of her store all redone because she had just moved and they had a water leak and it damaged a ton of fixtures and they had to redo everything. And my friends at Avid have had the same thing. Bookmarks has had the same thing. And I probably know a dozen stores that have had water leaks like this. We've had a water leak with the people next door to us where their toilet valve broke and it flooded their store completely and seeped into our space a little bit. And so it's just a matter of when something's going to happen. I believe now with COVID, we kind of all accept that, yeah, something's going to happen, and kind of with all the tension in the air with, you know, civil unrest and political unrest and the potential for craziness with the election coming up. Everybody definitely feels tense about it, but it's all, you know, it's also, you know, it's not just about trying to stop those things from happening, but it's trying to grant yourself peace of mind to know that something's going to happen. And when it happens, I'm going to be okay because I have all of these resources. And that's kind of what, that's kind of the book Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging by Sebastian Junger that I have up there. After our flood in 2016, I had a tremendous amount of just stress. My mind was just partially broken for a little while, and I had a tough time reconciling a lot of the world around me with my new reality. And so it was just, that book helped me through a lot. And I highly recommend it. I'd recommend it for anybody that was dealing with any type of trauma or tragedy or anything bad that's happened to them. And yeah, I won't necessarily go through the when it happens list. I'll let you guys kind of do that on your own, so that we can kind of move on to questions and comments and that sort of thing. But I wanted to leave everybody kind of with this quote, and this is something that I heard on the radio. I wish that I could remember. I've actually searched and searched to try to find the radio program that it was on. But tragedy without transformation is truly a tragedy. It was a jazz musician that said the quote. I have no idea who it was, but it was a musician, and he was talking about how they were unable to perform due to COVID, and they were exploring all these new avenues with, online performances, backyard performances, street performances, front porch performances, and he was just talking about moving forward. And he said this little line, and it just really stuck with me. And I thought it was really valuable. And it's something that I kind of wrote down because I wanted to make sure that it was always handy. But yeah, with that, I'll stop sharing my screen because I need to take a sip of water, and I'll let, if anybody else has a comment or a question or anything, we can get to that. Let's see. Did anyone have anything in particular? Let's see. I'm opening up my chat here so I can see if anybody had anything. Oh, hey, Kelly.
Hey.
See you raise your hand.
I don't know how to unraise my hand. That's always the embarrassing thing.
I lowered it for you.
Okay, I think I figured it out. One of the things that I got really concerned about with the increase in web traffic was cyber threats. I've had bookseller friends who've experienced threats and attacks and had data breaches and things like that. So I called my insurance agent, Greg, for reasons that would take too long to explain here. We're with Farm Bureau. It's kind of a legacy thing that we're insured by people who normally insure farmers. But so this whole cyber threat thing was a little new to our little insurance company. But I feel much better. Somebody in the chat asked me what it covers. It does cover things like, let's see, I just opened it up. It covers things like ransomware. It was about $170 some a year rider for $50,000 worth of coverage per year. And it covers things like public relations costs if you get compromised. It covers some loss of business. It covers identity recovery, a forensic IT review, and some mental health counseling because you're going to need it if this happens to you. It covers that. I was surprised to see that in there. Not a whole lot of mental health coverage, but some. And I don't know. I just think that's something worth considering now that our traffic on our websites is so much higher. That's one thing that just scares the bejesus out of me. So so that is something I went and got covered for right away. Yeah. Do we have an extra $177? No, not really. But do I have the reputation to lose? No, I don't have that either. That's
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's definitely something that I want to look at too. Insurance is everybody has insurance. Everybody hates it. Everybody hates insurance, but it's one of those things where when you have it and it pays off, it's huge. When that wheel came through our store, the little things, the details that it covered. We had a disaster cleanup crew coming through our store within probably 4, 5, 6 hours. They were there the same day, vacuuming, cleaning, taking stuff out of the store. And those little details of what's covered and what's not covered. And I can't even, that's honestly an area where I haven't even wrapped my head around the virtual stuff of ensuring all of that, because yeah, it's definitely a conversation that I'm going to have to go have with my agent before too long.
Yeah, Angela's asking, where do you get
Yeah.
business insurance? And
Yeah.
mine was a legacy. I've had the same insurance. I inherited mine. So that's a great question. Where would you start from if you were starting from scratch? I mean, ABA, I know, has a recommended.
Yeah,
thing,
ABA definitely has
others
theirs.
out there, your bank maybe.
Yeah, and definitely, definitely networking in your local area, you'd be able to get stuff. The agent that I'm with now, I met him through business, BNI, Business Networkers International. It's just like a networking group of business owners that get together. I'll tell you, insurance, it's one of these things where I wouldn't go in and just, sign up for a policy immediately. Definitely shop around. Because I'll tell you, a lot of insurance agents, they really just want to fill out the forms, fax it into their underwriting department, and they really like cut and dry sort of scenarios. And the businesses that, in the way that I've operated them over the past have never really been cut and dry. Like, for example, for us with the issue of doing book fairs, when we're simultaneously operating our store, we're transporting a large quantity of inventory somewhere to and from. We're potentially storing inventory off-site, sometimes like in a trailer in a parking lot somewhere if we have to. And then we're also dealing with the liability of the event that we're running at the various schools. And so it's, I've probably, over the past 11 years, I've probably sat down with 20 insurance agents. Haven't liked a single one of them, except for this guy that I'm with now. I kind of like him a little bit. And it's all got to do with the amount of work that they're willing to put into it and to actually understand your business. My agent now, we do annual reviews. And so I make sure to go in for my annual review. I don't just phone it in or send an email saying, yeah, it's okay. I make sure that I go in, make sure they get me a cup of coffee, and we sit down and we have a conversation for 30 minutes. And we say, yes, I still don't want the terrorism waiver. I'm going to risk that. But I do want to increase my flood coverage on the storage unit that I have or whatever, so it's definitely an interview process. And I'd say the same thing for bankers as well. And then what else was it? Yeah, Angela, you'd also asked about what percentage of revenue do you set aside for reserves? So we don't have a set percentage that we do. I'll tell you the way that we operate our businesses. I operate my retail business as, I think of my retail business as my checking account, and I think of my wholesale business as my savings account. My wholesale business is very bare bones. It is inventory in, inventory out, no frills. We serve a very narrow market. And so that's kind of the way that I've approached it, so that, I've got that supply of books. I've got that cash flow. I've got that set of resources. And I also keep that money in the bank and don't ever touch it, except to immediately reinvest it in inventory that we'll sell. And so, yeah, that's something that you kind of have to, wrap your head around the way that you individually want to do it. I don't necessarily think there's a magic number, but any amount that you could set aside is better than none. So, I mean, getting started in your own personal situation, I think, is the most important part with coming to terms with what you feel most comfortable with. And yeah, I saw Angela, I saw your windows got busted out by the hurricane. That was unfortunate. I was glad to see that it wasn't too bad. And yeah, Angela, you also mentioned that you reached out to the ABA insurance. I will tell you this, that they don't cover wind damage on the Gulf Coast. That's the reason we're not with them. I would probably switch to them just because of the ABA association, but they won't underwrite us because of the hurricane threat here on the Gulf Coast. And yeah, anybody else have anything? Oh, and look at that. My lovely wife put that in about the wind coverage in the chat. She's so wonderful. Well, anybody else? Anything? Any comments? Any questions? Any concerns? Anything? Cool. Well, all right. Well, I guess that leaves us. I see that Linda Marie has posted a Google form in the chat. Employee fraud. Kelly, yeah. Kelly asking about employee fraud. And yeah, that's definitely something you've got to talk specifically about with your insurance agent for sure. Because some policies cover it, most don't, I'm pretty sure. I think that's a rider that you've got to get added to your policy. But it's definitely something worth thinking about, because I know I don't know the statistics, but I mean, it's one of those things that you always hear where it's fortunately, it's a bigger problem than I've personally experienced. So, but yeah. Well, cool. All right, y'all. Well, yeah, definitely check out the link to the Google form for the feedback in the session. And I hope that everyone else enjoys the rest of the show. I hope y'all are having fun and learning some new things and making some great contacts. Be sure, if you haven't yet, be sure to register for all the events that you're going to as soon as humanly possible. I know I'll be manning the publisher meeting rooms tomorrow. So if you guys want to stop by there, I'd be more than happy to assign you guys to a room tomorrow. And yeah, I thank y'all all
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
attending.